Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Sunday morning chat today is going to be a bit more doing than chatting, or chatting while doing, let's put it that way. I'm going to try and knock off some items off of the viewers' request list as I go, and one of the things was to have a look at and talk about the cooler growers and how I manage them in a place that basically isn't cool, or certainly during the summer anyway. They're in their element in the winter time in here, but not in the summertime. So that one I'll do. There's a couple of others. Somebody asked about the fors and againsts of rainwater. I've got a lot to do today, so I'm actually going to start watering while I'm chatting. One of the things on the list was how do I water my plant? So I'm killing that one off as we go. Trouble is with the cooler growers, there's an awful lot of bending and mucking about. And some of these, a classic example there, little Masdevallia, that was a gift. That doesn't need watering, it's still wet. Yeah. So, decision number one, does it need watering? Now I've got a feeling, looking at some of these, that I may have got my notes wrong, because that is still soaking wet as well. That's a Draculalia, and it's a letter page. That again was a gift. And on this particular one, I've got no signs of brand new, well yes I have. I've got one brand new leaf that's just opening. Yeah. Now I'm told, because I don't know specifically, that although this is a Dracula crossed with a Masdevallia, the blooming on it is Masdevallia dominant, so the spikes will come out the top of the plant, not the bottom, which is good because they're not going to get out of the bottom of that pot, that's for sure. I haven't repotted that one. It's in whatever the person potted it in. It was a division. It's a nice size. It's a large plant, as these types go, and it's sort of growing. I don't see any brand new leaves starting, but I've certainly had 2 new leaves since I got it, so we won't be watering that one. I think there's going to be quite a few of these that don't get watered. That's a little Masdevallia. That was a very small plant when I got it, and I'm pretty confident now that's full of water. I've got my notes wrong, so I'm not sure this section needs watering today. I've had a lot on the go at the moment, and the notes are the last thing that I update, the last thing I look at. The plants are more important than writing it down, if you see what I mean, but I do get caught out sometime. But at least we can look at them. I need to still take them each out to double check, because the last thing I want is any of these going dry at the sort of heat we've been getting here. Now, ideally, these plants in this section shouldn't really get up much above 21 degrees, and they should have a drop at night of at least 5 degrees. Now if you don't do centigrade, well, tough, because I do. But there's easy ways of converting. This is a Masdevallia hybrid, no ID, and until it blooms again, I don't know which one it is. I had in my notes, and I've still got in my notes, 5, and I've only got one of them left, but I don't know which one it is. I'm hoping it's the bright orange one with the purple tinge. The tinges on the Masdevallias are actually not colour. They're actually tiny minute hairs that have the colour, and they sheen, so they're very attractive if you can get some of those. All of my Masdevallias and Draculas, again that one's still soaking wet, are either in pure moss or moss and small bark. Yeah, every single one of these I'm picking up is wet, so I just haven't updated my notes. These don't need doing today. That's a little Restrepia. That was a gift. It's a species, gutulata. This is putting on some new growth at long last. This has been very, very slow to grow, very slow. Virtually everything in this section has been repotted at some point this year, mainly earlier in the year to let them settle down before the heat comes. These are all kept shaded, yeah? They're shaded by higher shelves. You can see each time I pick one of these up, I'm down at floor level here. So in actual fact, they've got 3 shelves above them. And the sun's high in the sky this time of year. There's not a lot of light gets down through those shelves. They're in the lowest light area I've got. This is my struggling Masdevallia snowbird. This is what's left of what was 2 plants, but one had effectively rotted. And there's some signs of some new growth coming at the bottom. But when I got to repot those, I had no roots. The plants were just sitting and they were doing nothing, and they've been doing nothing for a long time. These were the best bits of 2 potfuls, just put in a single pot to see if it'll actually produce some roots and grow. That's in pure moss, that one. So low light levels as far as my grow room goes for these. There's another little Restrepia. This is one of 2. When my daughter decided she wanted to try growing orchids in her flat apartment, you'd probably call that, I did say that you will have trouble with an awful lot that you like, because you won't be able to grow them because you can't keep the humidity up where they need them. Restrepias are happy with 90% humidity. They don't even mind going right up to the 100 mark. But when you're in a sort of home environment, you're lucky to get much above 40%. So these plants were dying when I eventually got them back. They originated from Burnham's. They are now growing. You can see on this one, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 new leaves coming. So these are starting to get a hold now, which means they will have produced some roots since their repot. And if they haven't, they will be very soon. What else we got down here? Nearly done with the lowest shelf, which stops the bending. I've drastically decreased my bending by using this new shelf top that I've got. So although I've got to bend down to pick them up, I used to put them on the floor. So, you know, bend down, pick them up, water, put them down on the floor, bend down, pick them up, put them back on the shelf. Well, I've got rid of one of the bend downs now by keeping them up at my level before I put them back. And this is the other one of the 2 of my daughters. And again, this one's growing some nice leaves. They're not distorted. So it's coming back from the brink. It's taken a long time to bring back from the brink. And this is to go, if it doesn't die before it goes. This is Restrepiodes Dragonstone. It's a pleurothallid of some sort. When it blooms from the base of the leaf and pushes the spikes out, and if it blooms, the blooms on this are gorgeous, but I just cannot get this to grow. Insa's got a nice one of these. he might have another one to go with it one day. Doesn't do anything for me, it's just one of those, I'm afraid. And then this thing up here, this is another Masdevallia Dracula cross, and unfortunately the Masdevallia element is Viciana, which is a cold grower, not cool, cold. So this one struggles. I don't know anything about the Dracula that's mixed in with it, Hawley Eye, but nonetheless it's in an open basket in moss, and I've got quite a bit of new growth coming on this. One here, several pushing out at the base now. So this one's taking off a bit now since it was repotted. I hope it's growing some new roots in there because it didn't have many, but at least it's still hanging in there. Now that one, although that is damp, it's not wet. So if I leave that one now, it'll dry. Either tomorrow or the day after, that moss will be dry, and I'm not here tomorrow, you know, so I can't risk that one. So even though it looks like it ought to be left, it's going to get a good soak. And this is all I do. These are due a flush today, even though not many of them are getting it. So I will have to put a note in my notes to say that although today on the 14th I watered my cooler growers, most of them didn't actually get watered. So this whole section is going to need looking at again in a couple of days. 3 at the most. So I've messed up my routine here. So that's how I water. I just pour water in the pot. And in the case of that one, I don't even really need to let it drain. Yeah? It doesn't matter if that stands in water. It's in very open, loosely packed moss. It's not going to compact. Well, not for a while anyway. But by the time it starts to compact, it'll be time to replace the moss anyway. So that's that shelf done, and one got watered. So as I said, there's a mistake in my notes somewhere. Watering. Water quality and water type was another one of the questions, so I'll do that now while I'm putting this lot back. You've got choices. We start off with the tap water. If your tap water's good, then there's no reason why you shouldn't use it. You know, why spend money on getting a different form of water when your tap water's okay? By okay, personally I would say that a TDS reading needs to be less than 60. Above 60, I mean, when I feed these cooler growers, I feed at around 80 to 100 parts per million. And that's in RO water, which starts off with a parts per million of 10. So if I'm feeding at 80, 70 parts per million is food. Yeah? If my tap water was 60 and I wanted to feed at 80, only 20 parts per million would be food and the other would be unknown. That's why I'm not too keen on tap water. Nonetheless, it's usable excuse me, if it's got very, very low parts per million. Whatever those parts per million are, you still don't know what it is. You might be able to get a water analysis from your supplier, you know, the actual water board, the people who create the stuff that comes out of the tap. And some tap water is okay. In the States, you've got well water. I'm still not quite sure what that is, because I can't imagine you all going down the garden and winding a bucket down a big hole and bringing it back up, which is how I see a well. But I think well water in the States just means it's come from underground rather than out of a river. That's all I can think of. I may be wrong. So that's that shelf done. Moving on from tap water, if it's good enough, it's usable. You might find some with very sensitive roots like Miltoniopsis, and some of these cooler growers in here, Masdevallias, Restrepias and some other Pleurophthalid types, might not be too happy if the parts per million of that tap water's creeping up. Yeah. Next to that sort of water, we've got rainwater. Now, I always put a proviso on rainwater because it's probably the best free source of water you can get, but how do you store it? So I've just got a spike to cut off here. I always keep my scissors handy to save keep walking in and out. When I'm out, there's a spike to come off there. One bloom's gone, leaving the two that won't be far behind, I don't suppose. Now this one is dry, yeah? So this one will need watering. Quick look at the colour of the moss, colour of the media, it's getting dry, yeah? So this one does need some water. And that's all I do. I just pour water through the pot and I look through the clear pot to see what's going on in the pot to make sure the water has wetted every single part of the pot, because you'll sometimes get a little dry patch down the side and often that's where the most roots are. And the water's running down either side, and where the roots are is still dry, so you still need to look. Yeah, this is not a very happy plant at the moment. I think it could do with going a fraction lower in the pot, but not now. So that's that one. Where did I get to? Rainwater. Rainwater's good stuff, don't get me wrong, but it can vary dramatically depending on what it touched before you collected it. Now a lot of people collect their water off of roofs, it then goes into guttering and then goes down into their rain barrels. All I can say about that is the area that the water's running over before it hits your rain barrel needs to be clean, and it needs to be of a material that doesn't allow any residual elements of it to run off. Like concrete roof tiles will often give off calcium type lime, yeah? When they stay dry for a while, they get like a surface film on them, and then when it rains, you wash that down into your rain barrel. You might find your old parts per million of your rainwater is higher than you thought it would be. So again, always check. But the other thing about rainwater is storage, and you end up with these huge big rainwater barrels, and some of the water has been in there months and months and months. And you have to bear in mind, rainwater is not pure, and depending on what it washed down from, it's not pure, yeah? If you collect the rainwater direct, in other words, the rainwater goes into a container and doesn't run off of anything, then it's probably as good as it can ever get. But storing it long term, bearing in mind it's not pure water, you will end up with some stuff in your water. Pathogens, bacteria, even seeds of plants, moss spores, all these sorts of things can get in your rainwater. And if you store it long term, it's no longer pure. It's got stuff in it that would be better if it didn't go on your orchids. So I always put a proviso on rainwater. Store it dark, store it cool, and try not to store it too long. You know, if you think about it, if you had a really wet winter, so I'm just getting a bit more water, and that water is runoff water that will gradually have its pH being lowered. So every now and again I dump it and start with clean. And I only use a small bit at a time. That's how I control that. Now again, this moss isn't dry by any means, but it will either be dry tomorrow or the next day. This is Masdevallia ignea. This should be dead. This should not be alive in here. This is a cold grower. Maximum temperature for that, ideally 18, 19 degrees and down below 10 at night. Well, it ain't getting anything like that in here. Is it growing? Yes. Is it growing well? Yes. So it's hanging in there. The reason it's hanging in there, it's directly in front of one of my little computer fans. It's literally about 6 or 7 inches away from that fan. It's under a constant cooling breeze. So that's how that one's staying alive. It's got its own little microclimate just for this one plant. And because it's a large plant, the plants behind it don't get anywhere near as much of that fan directly on them. What's happening with you? Well, you're growing. This was the little piece off one of the rescue Miltoniopsis, the yellow one from Eric Young, which I just kept because yellow Miltoniopsis are, they have value because they're not easy to get in the EU. They just don't seem to come up so often. And that's got 2 nice new growths coming on it, so hopefully that one will push on. It's in the tiniest of pots inside there. And before anybody asks, the black pots are to stop the algae growing. They're not decorative, although some people might think they are. I treat them as functional. They serve a purpose. This Restrepia objected badly to being repotted. It's sulking. It's sulking quite well as well. It's doing a good job of sulking, this one. That's its latest new leaf. That might open clean. Another new leaf there, not distorted. So I think it's starting to get some roots together, but again, it's still wet. It doesn't need watering. Where did we get to? Rainwater. Watch your rainwater if it's runoff water, yeah? If it's collected direct, it'll be fine. But long-term storage of rainwater, things will live in that water and grow and multiply. So you still always have to ask yourself, how pure is that water when it's been in that barrel 6 months with things breeding in there and lurking and, you know. Less chance of that becoming bad if the water is used up and replenished quickly, which if you're in a place where you get quite a bit of rain and you've got lots of orchids and use it up quickly, it's constantly being refreshed. That's probably fine, you know. Right. Back to the bending now, because we're on the bigger stuff. Right. This one objected to being repotted, but I think it's still not pushing up squeaky clean leaves. Oh, it's actually got some blooms tucked around the back there that I couldn't see. Restrepia blooms are almost impossible for me to film close up because the camera just won't focus really close in. But to me, they are some of the most interesting shaped blooms in the orchid world. They really are unusual. Is that a bug? Sorry, I think it looks like there might be a bug on that bloom. Oh no, just a bit of moss. Yeah, so that's rainwater out of the way. Now, distilled water is clean, comes in bottles, but you have to pay money for it. Unless you're going to distill it yourself, which I doubt that's going to work very well. So I think that water didn't last long, did it? Depends what pot it's going into, how long it lasts. This is a big pot inside here. Now, all of these plants I'm watering now should not dry out. In the sort of weather I've been having, the sort of heat, if any of these go totally dry, the roots will probably frazzle and die. And then you're starting to recover the plant and you haven't even taken it out of its pot or disturbed it, it's just gone. So they should not dry out under any circumstances when you've got heat. Because they don't want the heat in the first place, they prefer not to have it. That's that one. So distilled water, you buy it, unless you want to make it yourself. This one was repotted a while ago and this one's going mad. Now these plants look really tatty because when I repotted them I didn't tidy them. To tidy a Restrepia, all these old bloom spikes need to get trimmed off. And any of the really oldest leaves, you trim them off back near the base, and what you're left with is all the nice young growth, which is where the blooms are going to come from. But a lot of Restrepias, not all, are multiple blooming from the base of each leaf. So once a leaf matures, it'll produce a spike with a bloom. They come from the underside of the leaf, and then it will produce another one and another one and another one. So if you're trimming these tatty bits off, make sure you don't trim any nice new spikes that are just forming. Yeah. But to tidy them, it's just a matter of taking off old tatty leaves and all those spindly bits left from where blooms once were that have since dropped off, and then that little spike dies back. Just leaves a stringy bit. And it does make them look pretty tatty. It doesn't do them any harm, don't get me wrong, and I don't fuss with them. Every now and again I'll have a tidy up and just do one plant because it's tedious. It's one of those jobs, it can take ages and it's fiddly. It's all close in stuff, you know. But it's literally, it's all this stuff would come off. And without that, and some of the older leaves, it would look like quite a nice big green bush. Whereas at the moment it looks like it's half dead when it's far from it. So that one's coming on nicely. So that's that shelf done. Now notice I watered quite a few more now, but there are some in here that always dry off in between a run. So they get done every time without fail. But there are some, mainly because they've been in their pot a relatively short amount of time, not too long, but they haven't filled their pot with roots yet, so they're not using the water up as quickly. So some get missed. Right, where did we get to? It's all right, these have each of these has a place. And the Ignea, as I said, has got its own individual microclimate right in front of that little computer fan. Without fail, that's got to stay cool. And those leaves are constantly moving, being that close to the fan. And then the rest of these are the Miltoniopsis. Yeah, I've had to move my Miltoniopsis because although some of them were in bloom and I put them up on this shelf for display purposes, the light's getting them. It's just too bright for them. So I've just got a dead leaf to trim off. Daft putting it back with a dead leaf on, isn't it? It's only going to fall off and then it'll fall on top of something else, which is not ideal. But this sort of thing was starting to happen. Yeah? So I've moved them back down onto their shady spot where they get a lot more air movement. Well, I suppose they still get air movement up here from the big fans, but yeah, they were just not in their ideal home, basically. So I popped them back where they go. And the next two are my nuisance Draculas, because they have to hang. These push their spikes out of the bottom of the pot, so they have to go in an open basket whether you flipping like it or not, and mustn't dry out. And these do dry quite quickly. They can dry in 2 days, even though the moss is dripping wet, literally dripping wet. And I just keep pouring that water on this type of basket until I see puddles in the bottom of the pot. There's a little rim around the bottom there that holds a small amount of water for a short space of time before it does run out. And I keep watering that until that puddle forms at the bottom, at which point I know it's wet. That's that one. A bit more water. Again, with pure moss, I know that when I pour water through the pot, it drops the pH. So the runoff water that goes into the next pot is already at a lower pH. So I try not to repeat that process on the ones in pure moss, more than 2 pots. 2 at the most. What have we got here then? Another spike blasted. This is my Dracula Bella. Keeps pushing out spikes, but they won't bloom. They just keep drying off and blasting. And I was advised that could the pot possibly be drying out? And I sort of said, well, I don't think so. It does get watered frequently, but what I'm hoping is that it has a rest from pushing these spikes out for the rest of the summer. Concentrates on getting some more new leaves up. It is growing new leaves. We have got new growths on here, quite a few. So the plant's growing quite nicely. But the blooms keep blasting. So be it. I mean, it's in the most humid place I can keep it. So I can't do any more, that's all I can do. But what I'm hoping is that it'll stop pushing the spikes out now, and not push any more out till the autumn, when the heat's died off a bit, if you know what I mean. So, and then hopefully the blooms will make it, and we'll see those nice Dracula Bella blooms again. Now this was another one of my daughter's attempts at growing something different. This is Paph Delanatii Vinicolor, so it's the darker coloured form. And this spent 1.5 years with no roots at all, absolute 0 roots. And now it's growing a couple of roots. It's grown 2 new leaves and lost 1, so a net gain. But it is losing its lowest leaf here at the moment. Not ready to come off yet. I try not to pull leaves off and tear them. I try and let them fall naturally or cut them. If you pull them and tear them, you leave a damage behind where it's possible to get infections in. Now, all of my Paphiopedilums got repotted this year, so they're all in new media. And as such, I don't need to take them out and check to see if they need watering, because I know they do. And these on occasions do actually get dry, which they shouldn't do. Doesn't kill them. But it's if a nice active root tip on a Paphiopedilum stays in dry media for any length of time, the root tip will stop growing, and then you've lost the progress of that root. So it's best not to do it. That's the easy answer. We've got roots in here. Yeah, we've got a nice big root round the top there. Yeah, and that's right at the top of the plant. That's the place that dries the quickest. Yeah, so it's possible I could lose the growing tip. But I'm lucky I've got a growing tip. When that was repotted, it didn't really have much going for it. Right, where did we get to? We did the distilled water, didn't we? And then we move on to what I use, which is RO water. And quite a lot of the growers I know, both from Wessex and from Bournemouth to a degree, actually ran out of rainwater last year. We had 2.5 months with no rain and excessive heat during that period. So their water usage went up dramatically and they had nothing to replenish it with. And I had lots of people coming up to me and saying, can you talk about an RO unit? What do they cost? Where do I get one and how do they work? And a lot of people moved over to that as a backup. Not a replacement, I don't think. Although I do know one that's bordering on not bothering with the rainwater anymore because of the possibilities of what could be in it. Whereas with the RO water, it stays clean. I mean, mine gets produced through the RO unit. That gives me pure water in a sterilised large, well, I use the Vander bucket basically to catch the water in from the unit. Well, that's got a nice new root on it as well. This is what we like to see with Paphiopedilums, and I found that I'm maintaining my roots on these far better since I started repotting them every year and not taking the risk of leaving them. So I just do it now. And I'm afraid that comes into the category of whether they need it or not, they're going to get it. And they seem to have responded by growing a bit better and maintaining their root systems and not losing them. So I'm winning. But I'm not going to win with things like this. Now this would be the downside of using a sprayer to water my plants, which I do occasionally. I've been doing it a lot with my mounts. You might not be able to see this, but I'll see if I can get it to the camera. If you look down into the centre of that plant, that's mealybugs. And they're right down where the young new leaves are. They're right down in there. Now, if I hadn't picked that plant up, I wouldn't have seen them, would I? So this is what I'm on about, handling your plants. Get to look at your plants, see what's going on. See, I can see here, there's a little root tip there. So that's from a new root, direct off the base. And that'll hit the side of the pot and hopefully go downwards instead of round the top. So that one needs to go to one side because I need to get rid of those mealybugs. That's just a spot treatment. That will just be some alcohol on a Q-tip and just go over that area and that will kill those off. But I'll put that one to one side. If I put it back, I'll forget. Bet this one's bone dry. Quite dry. It's not absolutely bone dry, but it's not far off. Now if you look at what's happening with this one, talk about a flipping nuisance. Look where the, oh, actually two new roots. I've got one new root heading across the top of the pot, there, yeah. That's okay, that's got enough sort of media around it, and it's just going to get a bit more to stop it drying off while the tip goes down in the pot. But the next new one it's put out is on the inside of that leaf, yeah. That could easily dry out. If I try and cut that leaf off, I will probably damage that root. So I know it sounds daft, but I'm hoping the leaf dies and then the root will get down in the pot. It's just, you know, I mean, the new growth's coming up here, yeah, and the new roots are pushing out. You often find Paphiopedilums push their new roots out at the time the new growths start pushing on. Sometimes the new growths get a reasonable size before the roots start. Sometimes the roots start exactly at the same time, but they do tend to come, the new roots, with the new growths. And in my case, the older fans usually then die off throughout the rest of the year. I end up with a single fan, which then blooms. And the bloom gets cut off, the spike gets cut off, and after a short amount of time, a new growth starts and pushes out some more roots, and then the old bit dies. So it goes on. So most of my paths are just single fans. For a while they've got two, yeah, while the new one's growing on, but then that's their lot. Now I'm having to keep my eye on the camera because my battery's getting low and I suspect the time's ticking on anyway, and I've only got one more of the cooler growers to do. See these, the ones I'm watering now, the runoff water would not have dropped the pH very much because there's a good portion of bark in there as opposed to pure moss. The ones with the pure moss drop the pH quite dramatically. Oh, we must have a spider in there somewhere. We've got cobwebs. They're allowed, they don't do any harm. See now this one, this is a new growth that was separated off and potted separately. So new roots to go with the new growth, older roots in this case still there. So I've got active root tips 1, 2, 3, 4 on that plant. Now that's a single growth, and it's the one that was taken off my Mordiae that hadn't bloomed. The first time one of the new growths on that plant, it always grew 2 and they bloomed one after the other. But this time round, this new growth didn't bloom. So I thought, right, you're going to get separated off this time. And it seems to have worked well because this one's now producing a very good root system. So that was good stuff. Right, so that's my shady shelves done, -3. There are 3 more plants lurking, which I'll just pop these back because they're now in the way, of course. I put my plants in the drip trays to drain, but I always make sure before I put them back I empty them. I don't want them sitting in water. Now in theory, the bottom of the black pot has got like little feet on it, and the clear pot that's inside has got more feet on it. So the actual base of the pot is a long way above the drip tray, so they wouldn't really be standing in the water. But I don't like to take the risk. Right, so that's that lot done. And how's that battery doing? Well, it says 30 minutes, but they're always a guideline. They're never real minutes. Right, the other 3. Oops, let's get the giant brass here out of the way. Oh, are my 3 rescue Miltoniopsis that came from the Eric Young Foundation, which are recovering, which I'm very pleased about. Let's get one out of its pot. I do have some new roots starting. There's a few just getting away from the plant, and some are actually starting to go down in the pot. So they're coming on. I have got new growths, yeah? So I think they're okay. But what happened with these was they had Fusarium quite badly. So they had a real serious treatment. Basically, before the plants got potted, so while they were bare rooted, not that they had many roots because most of them were rotten, they were put into the fungicide solution and left to soak for 24 hours basically, so that as much as possible got up into the base of the plant. Then the plants were sprayed, absolutely drowned. Then they were potted up, and then they were treated again about 10 days later. Now they haven't actually been treated since, and they ought to be, so I will put that on my list to do. You notice sometimes I don't take them out of the black pot. I don't need to look to see if this one's starting to dry off. I can tell it by the weight. So I know it's not dry, but getting that way. And again, this one's got multiple new growths here. There's one coming up in the middle, another one here, another one here. So it's coming back to life. And as long as those new growths are clean from the Fusarium, the plants will recover. There's one more of those buried down here. Now this is an unusual one, this Miltoniopsis. Miltoniopsis have a different coloured leaf to the other Oncidium alliance types. They tend to have a silvery greyish sheen to them, and yet this one is green. If you put that in amongst other Oncidium types, you'd have a job to tell the difference. So this one has got a deeper coloured leaf to it. I suppose the only way I can show you, I'd have to get the camera down, forget it. Trust me, they're a different colour. But these 3, I consider them rescued, but not off the danger list. Because they had such poor root systems and were infected, they didn't get off to a good start in life. So they got a bit of work to do, and unfortunately they're not trying to do it in the best time of year. These came from our 60th show, which was the end of April, so they got repotted and messed about with into May. That's not an ideal time to mess with Miltoniopsis in my environment where it's starting to get hot, but they're recovering. Again, this one I think I've got a single new growth on this one so far. There's probably another one tucked over the other side. Nope, not at the moment. There's a flower spike in there, so that won't produce a new growth. But yeah, I've got a new growth and new roots coming out down into the pot. Yeah. Oops, always forget where my camera is. So this one's now got the best root system, even though it's got the least number of new growths. But it's coming back to life. That's all I'm interested. Those cost me a little bit of money for my normal sort of budget, which is as cheap as possible. Don't like paying a lot of money for plants. I don't worry about that so much nowadays because I've got my YouTube money coming in from your support. You know, the adverts go on the front of the videos, you watch the adverts, and I get some money as a consequence, which helps me maintain this place, you know, keep up with the kit, because that needs replacing every now and again. Buy some new shade netting, that's my latest purchase. You know, I mean, that was £100, that shade netting. That's not something I'd be able to do without sort of saving up otherwise. Very limited funds. Right, so that's that. RO water comes out pure, gets stored in airtight containers that are full to the top. So there is zero contamination. So when I come to use it, it's still pure RO water. In my book, it doesn't get any better than that. But what you do have to watch is the type of water you use will dictate, to a greater extent, the sort of fertiliser you need to go with it. Now, a lot of the fertilisers you buy that are non-orchid type fertilisers, certainly in the UK, probably other parts of the EU as well, won't have calcium in them because they expect the calcium to be in the tap water. That's not really the right sort of calcium. That's calcium carbonate, the stuff that furs up your kettle. That has to be worked upon in the soil to turn it into nitrates and make it usable. We don't tend to grow our orchids in the soil, do we? So you would be very short on calcium. So my MSU fertiliser was designed for RO water or rainwater, so it's got the calcium in it. Yeah, so I'm not doing food today. Right, so that's a look at my cooler growers. Ideal temperatures for everything apart from the Paphiopedilums. All my Paphiopedilums are the mottled leaved type. In the main, they grow warmer than the plain dark leafed types that just are plain deep green. They tend to grow cooler. So those are the only ones that this wouldn't apply to. Miltoniopsis, Masdevallias, Draculas and stuff like that, a high of 20-21 degrees, they'll be fine. And a drop down at night to below 15. It's nice to have a 5 or 6 degree difference between night and day, irrespective of what those temperatures are. And that applies to virtually all orchids. They like a drop at night. All of those could go down to 10 degrees at night. They'd be fine. Some of them could go lower. I suspect my Masdevallia ignea could go down to 5 degrees and still not worry too much. Yeah. The Paphiopedilums don't like to get quite that cold at night, and they don't like my winter because my winter temperature is set at 12 degrees C. That's a bit low for those Paphiopedilums. They just have to lump it, and so far they're lumping it okay. Yeah. Now what these actually get at the moment is 28 to 30 degrees during the day, and last night it went down to 19, so there's a dramatic difference between day and night. The only way I'm getting away with that is the high humidity. As I said, Restrepias, 90% humidity is their ideal world. They love things like vivariums in closed cases where the humidity can be kept dripping wet. Masdevallias and Draculas, they'll go down a bit lower. 70% starting to get a bit low for them. They'd prefer 80%. The Miltoniopsis, 70 to 80%. So all of that lot, flipping good humidity. If you've got humidity and still air, you've potentially got rot. So they need air movement as well to go with that humidity. Keep it moving around. The Paphiopedilums, they'll take warmer daytime temperatures without too much of a problem. They just don't like the winter. Right, that's cool growers, and so I'm just crossing the list off because otherwise when I sit down in a minute I'll have forgotten. And we've done water. And the fors and againsts. It's quite a lot on this list I can't do without doing a specific video. How's the battery doing? It's very close to going. Somebody asked about my pinguiculas that are practically starving to death at the moment because there's no flies left in here. They've eaten them all. This is my worst looking one, but this was an offshoot that I potted up. Now, you've got to go careful with these because they're very shallow rooted and very fine rooted. They don't really root into the pot as you think of it normally. The roots just sit near the surface. Now, if I grab hold of these dead leaves and pull, I've done it before. The plant comes out of the pot before the leaf lets go. So if you're going to pull dead leaves off, make sure you hold the plant in place. They don't have to be pulled off, they'll fall off on their own, but they do make it look a little unsightly. Sticky, I would say slimy leaves, not sticky, slimy. They're covered in a substance, and the flies land on there, can't get away, and the enzymes in that sticky stuff dissolve them into nutrients in through the leaves. They don't feed through the roots hardly at all. Fertilizers to these things is a death knell. They don't like anything but pure water. Their main food source comes in through the leaves, providing they've got some flies to catch. So I've got some in flower over here. This one's always doing well. This one's always got blooms on. There's 3 blooms on there now and another bud coming up. There's 2, 3 just gone over. And this one's already divided into 2 entirely separate plants. So that one could be split. You can see there's 2 crowns there, both producing buds. As far as potting media is concerned, I am told, I've never repotted mine, they're going to stay in there forever, or as long as I can get away with it. They like an acidic media, so something peat based would be good. And where I got some of these from was the Hampshire carnivorous plants. It's actually on the label there, Hampshire carnivorous plants. And I asked about repotting, and they said do it when you absolutely have to, or when the plant is so big that it's lifting itself out of the pot, in which case you can split it up. But using real peat for these is good, and added to that peat is some form of grit or perlite or something to help with drainage. But these are bog plants. Never let them dry out. When I water these, I fill the tray up with water, and if it all soaks up into the pot, I fill it up again until it sits there, and then it will last it a while. I've got one that's different. It's just not only fallen off the shelf, but fallen out of its pot. Now there's a bonus, because I was just going to say this is one that needs splitting. Well, now I've got an idea or opportunity. That's what it's in, peat. And that's just in peat with nothing added. That's as deep as the roots go. You can see there's hardly any roots. And I'm sure if I don't want to tease that peat because it'll go all over my floor. But if you look at this one is now where are we, camera? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is 7 plants. So this was doing what I just said. It was pushing itself out of the pot. Dropping it off the shelf helped it on its way, basically. Now for the first time ever, I'm going to repot a pinguicula later today. And I will take that one and split it, because a lot of people have asked about my pinguiculas, and a lot of people have said I can't get hold of them. Well, there'll be a few in separate pots of that one later in the year. And that one's, I believe that one's got a name. That is Pinguicula Cherry Blossom. Yeah. And now, see, that fell out of the pot. If I didn't want to repot that now, I can just place it back and gently push it down, and that's all it needs. You could see those roots didn't come out of the bottom, so they would still carry on without repotting that. It would be fine. But yeah, a peat-based mix I was recommended by, somebody who grows them as a profession and sells them professionally. So peat, and I would suggest some grit or perlite or both, just to allow the water to go through and not become a soggy mass. But acidic media, definitely. They're bog plants. So that's pinguiculas. Light levels for these are Mexican pinguiculas. We have got 1 or 2 native pinguiculas in the UK, and in the winter you will have nothing. They die back to nothing, which is why I chose the Mexican ones, which, providing they don't get too cold, will hold their leaves all year round. So there's always something going on. They're always there. They don't die back to nothing. And there's a lot of our, well, all of our native orchids do that. They have their leaves and their blooms and stuff, and then they die. They're gone, and then they come up again the next year. And a lot of the European pinguiculas do that. The Mexican ones are capable of staying green. If they get too cold, the Mexican types, their leaves change, and they grow some different types of leaves, more like succulents, for the winter period. And then they replace them with the feeding leaves when the better weather comes. Now these have always gone down to my minimum, 12 degrees, and they've never done that. So I would suggest that they can go down to 12 degrees without the leaf type changing. So they're okay in here. And pretty little flowers. I don't think I've ever seen a yellow one, not on the Mexican ones, but I suppose it's possible. But mainly whites, through the pinks, into the purples, and venturing into the reds. And some are patterned, some are plain, some are veined. They all have a basic shape, but they do vary in size, and there are some that have some quite large flowers. They're difficult to get hold of in the EU, but there are some suppliers around. Another one up the end here. Now this one has a very large rosette, but very short leaves. Yeah? So whereas this one is a very open one with very long leaves. So there's a variety in the shape of the plant. Yeah? But this little one here has very short length spikes, so the flowers are very close to the actual leaves. Now, I like that one a lot. Not large blooms, but again, I've got 2 large plants in that pot. That's what I bought, and that's grown since. And that one is yet to bloom, but it will do soon. Ah, it's got a mealybug on it. Yay! It's the one time I don't need to get the bugs off. These are bug eaters. They feed mainly on those little annoying fungus gnats. But they'll grab hold of anything that's not large enough to pull itself off, and then they just disintegrate. They use enzymes to dissolve the bugs and then feed through the leaves. So that's pinguiculas, brain dump, because I won't say I know a lot about those. In fact, I've probably said everything I know about them, and it didn't take long, did it? So let me just cross that off. Where's the pinguiculas gone? I know it's on the list. Oh, no, I've already crossed it off. That's why I can't find it. I scribbled over it. Right, one last thing I'll add in. This is nothing to do with things on the list, although it is in part. This little bulbophyllum has got its bloom. It grew 4 new growths, and it looks like, I think 2 of them may be going to bloom, although that might be a new growth, right? When I got this, it was labelled as Tingabarinium, and it's not. That is not what the flowers should look like. They are tiny, very, very delicate, and a beautiful colour. I'm not going to be able to possibly get close enough to really identify that. But anybody who grows bulbophyllums who recognises that bloom, I'm holding my finger there so that you get the impression of the size of the leaves against my hand. All of that comes into identification. It might not even be a species, but it was one of the ones that came out of the big box from memory. And discussing them with Beatrix, when this one came into bloom, and I said it's not what it says on the label, and she says, oh, that's another one that was mislabeled from that nursery. I won't say which one. But yeah, it's turned out that Beatrix had quite a few plants that were mislabeled, and when they bloomed, it turned out that they weren't what they were supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the base of that tiny little bulb, there's something shooting out there. Where's my camera? I mean, it could be another new growth. It might be a spike. But anyway, come to think of it, that spike has come off the previous growth. This is, where's the camera? That's the new growth. This is the previous growth, and the spike's coming out from the base. And that new growth and that new growth are both coming out from the growth behind the latest growth. So I suspect there's another 2 spikes on that plant, maybe 3. But that's it. Anybody who's good at bulbophyllums? Pity Archie's not around, he'd probably know what it was. Well, he's died the death, keeps threatening to come back and then not maintaining his threat. But I don't know what it is. I'm not going to make any effort to find out. It grows nicely. It's a small, delicate miniature. I don't know how long those blooms will last, but I just thought I'd show that in because that's the only new bloom at the moment. And that's going to do for today. I've knocked some of my list down. We've had a look at how I water. The only thing I'll add on the end is somebody's going to say, yeah, that's all very well for the pots. How do you water your mounts? Well, I'm just going to grab one. I'll have to water it again in a minute because this is pure water and these are on a feed, the mounts, when I get round to them. Whoops! And all I do with these is exactly the same. Yeah? I pour water over them. And this time of year, with the amount of air circulation and the temperatures I'm getting during the day, I don't care if I absolutely soak the base of the plant. I can get water on the leaves. I don't care. They're going to dry. Especially where this one was, because it's in the direct line of fire of the 2 big circulating fans. Let's find somewhere to put it. As an example of getting plants wet, let's have a look at this one. Don't ask me what this one is. I haven't memorized the name yet. But it's growing. It's a little miniature, and you know what? It's got buds on. It's something like Medio something or other. I'll do a pop-up if I think about it. But these are little buds. So I think that's going to bloom. That was a freebie from the speciotic plants when I bought my last 1 or 2. That one was thrown in. And I looked it up. It's a cold grower from a montane forest. So, 80-90% humidity, constantly soaking wet. And I mounted it and keep it in here where it dries out every day. But it's growing and it looks like it's going to bloom. Now that one, how could I water the moss? I don't even think about it. I don't even care if it's got buds on. That's how it gets watered. It gets soaked. Is that what would happen in the wild if it rained? Absolutely. And then where it comes from in the wild, it would have the airflow. Montane forests are not still air. That air moves. So when it's not raining, they would dry off relatively quickly. So that's the mounts. That's how they get done. Exactly the same. Just chuck water over them. Is another example of a plant that's going to get watered. Now why do you think that one's going to get watered? Look at where the roots are. It's growing kikis on virtually every cane. Yeah? And they've all got roots. Well, they need watering then, don't they? They're roots. So when I water that, the whole plant gets watered. The whole lot. The canes, the kikis, the dangly roots, the roots that are on the base of the plant. The whole lot. Excuse the clanging, but the bowl is glass. It's glass so that I can pour boiling water on it and sterilise it, which I do before I water, without fail. Because sometimes water's standing in here for 24, 48 hours, in the winter even longer. Well, standing water gets stuff in it that starts to breed and multiply. So I always start with a sterile bowl. But yeah, you can see the watering process is to just get the whole thing wet. Make sure the base, the moss is done, all the aerial roots wet. Now I could do that with a sprayer, and on that plant it would probably work fine. Yeah? A sprayer would water that plant fine. A sprayer probably won't do the job on that. That is a solid mass of moss and it's deep. It's 3/4 of an inch deep. All a sprayer's probably going to do is dampen the surface. Where are the roots? Down in the moss and on the mount. So a sprayer doesn't water this type of mount properly. Yeah? So it's a temporary measure. When I go round with the sprayer, I know that these haven't been watered properly and they need doing the very next day properly. But it allows me to go out sometimes when otherwise I might not be able to. Right, so that's watering done. Where did I get that from? Oh, up there. So I'm doing things out of sequence here for the sake of the video. Right, so that's water types, fors and against, watering, that's done. Yeah, the others are going to need separate videos in the main. Pests, diseases, I'll probably do those together. Looking after my vandas, separate thing. Or let me rephrase that, vandaceous types. Because if I'm going to do a care video for vandas, I've only got 2, but I do have vandaceous types that will come into that set. Specific Cattleya care, that's quite complicated because that was somebody asking about the types of Cattleyas that are in my specialist book, some of which have got certain resting periods. And could I go over some of that very specific care for those types? Yes and no. I'm not going to talk about plants I don't own. You can always ask. If you've got a Cattleya species and you think it might be in my book, which is the old classic Cattleyas, there's not hybrid species and only some of them, you can always ask in a comment. And I'll look it up, and if it's in there, I'll tell you. And the battery's just gone yellow, it will go red very quickly. So thanks for dropping by, and I'll see you next time. Lots of different things going on there, so hope you enjoyed it. And sorry my face isn't in it, but I needed the watering bowl, which although that's nothing much to look at, it's probably better than my face. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.